Yes, we're on. Okay, hi. My name is Sharon Marie Chester, a licensed clinical social worker and racially literate white person. Wanted to discuss with you something today regarding our police system and racism. Okay, we're going to refer to this as broken windows, stop and frisk, and stand your ground. And these are examples of how racism is embedded into our institutionalized police state, otherwise known as how we were conditioned to believe they're some kind of thug race. And the ones we happen to know just happen to be the exception. Okay? I'm making this video because of a conversation I had with an acquaintance who I was pointing out some of his racist narratives that he was buying into, and he very sheepishly said to me, "Miss Sharon, I don't want to be a racist, but it seems like when I watch the news, all I see is black people getting arrested." Let's address that. Now, I have to say I have some really great legitimate resources that I'm going to put in the comments section. These have to do with stats from the FBI, the Department of Justice, the New York Civil Liberties Union research, and a Rutgers Columbia research project on racism and policing. Broken windows, for those who don't know, is the idea that policing low-level offenses or crimes, if you address those early, you're going to prevent more serious crimes. It also suggests that neighborhoods where there's a greater concentration of physical and social disorder, as in those broken windows represents disorder, social disorder, they feel that that should translate into higher stop and frisk activity. It's a cycle. Okay, one study I found I thought was cool from the Department of Justice data from Los Angeles between 2003 and 2004 shows that blacks were more likely to get frisked than whites by 127%. That's the screening. They're more likely to get frisked. Then blacks are 76% more likely to be searched than whites. The interesting thing is this: frisked blacks were 42% less likely to be found with a weapon than those frisked whites. Think about this. What does this mean? This means our police department is unjustly targeting people of color and putting them under a disproportionate amount of scrutiny. It's an issue of reasonable suspicion. We will get into that. Okay, this really good study that I found by Fagan, the Columbia and Rutgers University combination project, called Street Stops and Broken Windows, Terry, Race, and Disorder in New York City. Okay, they refer to these investigatory stops. They're often called Terry stops, and that's after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Terry v. Ohio. This is when a stop is considered justified even though there's no probable cause for an arrest. How does that make it justified? Okay? All it takes is the police having a reasonable suspicion that the person is either engaged in or about to be engaged in illegal activity. Are you serious? When white folks were conditioned to see black skin as something scary, a weapon, of course, white people are going to be more reasonably, suspicious just based on skin color. This is not an okay thing. Okay, what's made clear is that there are different standards of reasonable suspicion for black people versus white people. The empirical evidence in this study suggests that policing is not about disorderly places, but about policing poor people in poor places. Because of multiple generations of Jim Crow laws in this country, more often than not, poor people in poor places are disproportionately black. So, the modern practice of racial policing should surprise no one. Racial profiling is often defended as a useful means to detect criminal behavior. racial profiling is defended, what do you think, they were born thugs? I mean, what's wrong with you people? Defended? No, racial profiling is a useful means to detect someone's melanin level. Hello. Calm down. So, by disproportionately concentrating broken windows policies in minorities' neighborhoods, poverty gets conflated with violence. The intergenerational poverty gets conflated with a culture of violence, and that culture of violence gets conflated with skin color, which is a distortion. Something called order maintenance policing. It turns out OMP, order maintenance, must keep the order. Law and order. Sounded familiar? Order, order. Turns out that this is a constructed racial policing. It's constructed racial profiling. In other words, it is the construction of disorder. Okay? That's what the system is. It's the construction of disorder to impose disorder into impoverished Black communities. This construction of disorder is aimed for the tightening of policing in places where violent and other serious crimes are most likely to occur, and that is often the ones with the highest concentrations of socially disadvantaged minority populations. The FBI put out a great, the Uniform Crime Reporting, let me get this. Put out the Uniform Crime Reporting Handbook, 2004. It states that even though Blacks were less than 13% of the U.S. population, they were 31% of all fatal police shootings. Let's ask why. Why would 13% of the U.S. population be 31% of all fatal police shooting victims? Now, if you're a racist or you're racially illiterate, you may presume that racist narrative that Blacks are more inherently violent. If you are a racist or racially illiterate, you may presume that Black people selectively choose to engage in a culture of violence. Just so happens the ones you happen to work with at the office happen to be the exception to the rule. That's racist thinking. If you are racially literate, you realize that for no other reason than racism, generations of Black people were funneled into ghettos where they need not apply for whites-only gainful employment. What resulted is generations of degradation and poverty against an entirely unjustly oppressed group of people who were systemically cornered into the kind of overcrowded, underfunded, dehumanizing, resource-deprived communities that would drive a person of any race to engage in activities that are less than human. This is not about avoiding calling a criminal out for criminal behavior. Buddha. Sorry, my dog's driving me nuts. Okay. This is not about avoid calling a criminal out for criminal behavior. It's about a system that promotes and perpetuates a criminal culture built on profiting by putting Black bodies into prisons. It's about acknowledging that in order to rectify these self-sustaining racial injustices, we've got to acknowledge them. This New York City Civil Liberties Union's research that was really excellent into New York's community policing history was interesting. It revealed that all the initial propaganda put out by the police department and the governor and the mayor, propaganda about the effectiveness of the stop and frisk turned out all to be lies. I'm going to talk about a few of those. Line number 1, they came out and said, stop and frisk reduces crimes and keeps people safer. What they said is, stop and frisk is a program that is effective. You used to not be able to walk down the streets of this city safely, and today you can walk every neighborhood during the day and most neighborhoods at night. For real? No, this is the fact. Crime data does not support the claim that New York City was safer because of this practice. In fact, stop and frisk abuses dramatically corroded the trust between the police and those communities, which makes everyone less safe. The New York Police Department Commissioner Ray Kelly in 2000, a few years later, came back and said, a large reservoir of goodwill was under construction when I left the police department in 1994. It was called community policing, but it was quickly abandoned for tough-sounding rhetoric and dubious stop-and-frisk tactics that sowed new seeds of community mistrust, rightfully so. Line number 2. Mayor Bloomberg's stop-and-frisk policy cut the number of murders in half. That was a total lie put out. The fact is, that murder rate drop happened before Bloomberg took office and before the explosion of the stop and frisk. The actual 19% drop that he can take some credit for is important, but to suggest those murders were cut in half because of stop and frisk is simply a lie. Number 3, stop and frisk gets guns off the street and therefore prevents murders. What they were quoted saying, there's no denying that stops take guns off the streets and saves lives. This is the fact. Guns are found in less than 0.2% of stops. Not 2%, 0.2% of stops. That is an unbelievably poor yield rate for such an intrusive, wasteful, humiliating police action. Yet stop and frisk increased more than 600% under Bloomberg and Kelly. Line number 4, stop and frisk is not discriminatory. This is the lie that they said. Blacks made up 53% of the stop subjects and were 66% of the violent crime suspects in 2011. For Hispanics, 34% were stop subjects and 26% were violent crime subjects. So they're saying blacks made up 50% of who we stopped. Hispanics were 34% of who we stopped. Okay, this is the fact. Black and Latino residents made up close to 90% of the people stopped. 90%, not 53, not 34, 90%. Even in neighborhoods that were predominantly white, black and Latinos were the ones who were picked up. In 2011, black and Latino New Yorkers made up 24% of the population in Park Slope, 24% of the population in this little community, but they made up 79% of the stops. This on its face, the entire practice is discriminatory. Another great article I came across called Race, Justifiable Homicide, and Stand Your Ground Laws. Analysis of the FBI's Supplementary Homicide Report Data by a PhD by the name of John Roman. Okay, he says from stop and frisk to motor vehicle searches at traffic stops to sentencing and the application of the death penalty, African Americans disproportionately are contacted by the criminal justice system in a myriad of ways. Again, considering that blacks are less than 13% of the U.S. population and they are 31% of all fatal police shooting victims, see, if things were aligned with the racist narrative, you would think that black on white homicides are always or almost always in the commission of some street crime. Okay, whereas the racist narrative also says that white on black murders were probably defensive shootings. Okay, these are racist conditioned narratives that are in our head. If this were actually the case, then the disparity in how many black people were getting murdered would be justified, but it's not the case. Okay, this guy found that white on black crimes were most likely to be ruled justified. Okay, 11.4%, only 11.4%, but 11.4% of white on black homicide were most likely to be ruled justified. However, black on white homicides were least likely to be ruled justified. at 1.2%. The odds, now get this is the killer statistic of all time. The odds that a white on black homicide, when a white person kills a black person, for that to be found justified is 281% greater than the odds that a white on white homicide is found justified. If you're white and you kill a black person, you have 281% more likely for your jury to find you as justified. That's amazing. In contrast, black on white homicide has barely half the odds of being ruled justified relative to white on white homicides. Can't be black and kill white people. Different standards. That's that Terry standard that I was talking to you about. His paper finds a substantial amount of evidence of racial disparities in justifiable homicide determinations, regardless of how the data are analyzed. Substantial racial disparities exist in the outcomes of cross-race homicides in this country. The recent expansion of stand your ground laws in 24 countries, 24 states, appears only to have worsened this disparity. This is the bottom line. We are murdering black people without impunity because we continue to justify our actions under some color of law. What we actually need to do is face the fact that we are continuing to justify these murders under an unspoken law of color. This has to end. This is on you. Thank you for listening.